Hello everyone, Dark Geyser here, welcoming you back to the latest in my Space Engineers Survival series. Today we're going to be doing some fairly basic housekeeping types of chores, hence the title of the video, primarily because I've been so busy building vehicles and experimenting with new processes and so forth. We have the projector over here building my new fighter craft and so on and so forth. I've been neglecting some of the more basic housekeeping chores, not the least of which, as you can see, it's kind of dark in here. So I thought I would get started putting up a few lights. And I'm just going to use interior lighting for now. I'm putting these inside the blast door area so that they will illuminate things even when the blast doors are shut. Really should see about putting up a epilepsy warning for the welders going off. We're going to put a few lights just inside up here. It does look a little bat cave-ish. And I do like to have light when I am working. And I don't like to rely on the lights from all of my vehicles. This is the headlamp from my Engineer, which is more than sufficient most of the time. I do have one overhead light that's attached to the base itself, and for some strange reason that's turned off. Let's go take a look. All of the interior lights that are actually fastened to the base appear to be on. This gives me an idea. I like the coverage, but I don't like the intensity. Now let me go ahead and turn off my helmet light. That's a bit better. I don't know why that light is not working. And this is one of the joys of the mod that I'm using, in the fact that I can go specifically to this light. I can turn this light on. I can tell what this light is. The intensity, everything is all set. Okay, I don't know why this particular light didn't respond when all of the rest of the lights did, but that's okay. I will probably be putting some more lights. I'll run a little bit more grid across the ceiling and make things a little bit, well, I actually have some steel plates on me right now, so I might as well do this now. I don't expect any of this to get welded up right away since we're still working on the fighter. I again have to thank my viewers. I have been receiving some very good comments and some very good suggestions from several of my viewers as to how to improve my content and so on and so forth, and I very much appreciate that. Want to make sure that I did not just turn on a color that is going to not do a good thing. Now let's do that again. It would be nice if I would learn how to spell. Now we only have to mess with the intensity of those last two lights because we had already set the other ones earlier. And I will eventually put all of those lights on a group, and I will have them set to do something interesting, turn off when I'm gone, and so on and so forth, just to save power. I also, however, wanted to put some lights outside, particularly on this part of the base, because this part is relatively new construction. I just put this down recently, and I just know that if I don't have some lights helping to define where it is, I just know I'm going to wind up smashing into it. And I did have some lights out here originally, but I think I cut those off when I put the turrets up. We're going to put one here to highlight our build and repair system so I can see it. And we'll put one underneath each of our turrets so we can see them, just like I have one up there. I really should move. Let me do this. I've been wanting to move this gun for a while, primarily because having it sit on top of the piston, not only does it come across as a different color because it's mounted on a subgrid, but I can't do anything else. I can mount more drills and so forth on the piston if I want to, but that means the gun is going to be going up and down, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good idea. Although, to be perfectly honest, it's not hurting anything where it is, and I certainly don't need to worry about doing any mining right away, so I guess I'll leave it for now. We can see the nanite build and repair system going back and forth. That's what the little flashes of color are. One of the other things I need to do today, and I apologize if today's episode is going to be a little bit boring for the viewers, I need to, well, at least I can see the tracer fire. The tracer fire is pretty at night. I need to come out and fix my driveway because my driveway in front of my base is just an absolute disaster. And now that I have the periscope on my rover, I actually feel like using it more. And unfortunately, driving it is something of a pain because of the fact that I wrecked my driveway while I was digging. So now we turn on our headlights, turn on the work lights, disconnect that thing, and then I turn off my connector so that I don't have to worry about the magnetic tug on the connector. And I refer to that as a soft dock because there have been quite a few times in the past where I have used that in order to hold a ship or a vehicle in place, but not actually lock it down, just to hold something in place when I was in space so that it wouldn't be drifting off. Now, I want to make sure that I level things off, but I don't want to clear away too much material, so I'm going to start way up here. And I'm going to be doing right-hand drilling here because I don't care about reclaiming any of the material. And now we actually get to the point where we're encountering material. This looks just about right. There was a time when I was spending most of my time in space and doing lots of mining and grinding of ships. Again, way back in the heyday when the view from there is terrible. Not the kind of angle you want to use for fine work. Back in the heyday, as I have mentioned in the past, when space engineers only had fixed maps, and so as a result we had finite amounts of resources, and so capturing randomly spawning ships was a perfectly valid source of material, particularly when the nearby asteroids had been mined out. And so I got very good at grinding down freighters and enemy warships and so on and so forth. And then when drones came along, one of the first drones that I built was a small grinding drone whose purpose was to get inside the larger ships and follow along the corridors and follow along the various pathways designed for engineers, just to be able to extract the really good stuff, because many of the ships back then were just big hunks of armor, and you could always just build a grinding pit and just go ahead and throw them into a grinding pit, and you would get a big slab of armor, big pile of steel plate. But when you wanted and needed the other material sooner, and you didn't really want to wait, then I would chase down the corridors. And there were more than a few humorous situations working with my partner in crime where one of us would be chasing the other one down a corridor with a drone, simulating or repeating something not unlike scenes from a Terminator movie. Now that I have one side reasonably flush, I want to make sure that I don't take off too much material on the other side. And again, I apologize if this is roughly as exciting as watching paint dry, but this is why I refer to this as a housekeeping episode, because I really have been neglecting my duties. I really should have done a lot of this stuff earlier. I also plan on installing the LCDs that will give me the readouts as far as how much ore I have in the base and how many ingots I have in the base and how many components I have in the base and so forth. Not sure if I'm going to get those hooked up. I am not as good with using the LCD scripts as I probably should be. I confess that there have been times where, after playing Space Engineers for many hours and then having a project break because of an update, I must confess that I would leave the game in frustration and not come back for days or weeks or even months, which is why, despite having 3,000 hours, more than 3,000 hours in the game, I am still a little rusty when it comes to some of the things that I consider fundamental in the game. And so I'm basically relearning some skills. One of the reasons why I decided to make this survival series is because I thought that the skills that I'm relearning are not unlike the skills that I think that a starting player should have and should learn. And it never ceases to amaze me when now see there, I need to make sure I'm not taking away too much. I may have to change my apron now. And there I go, losing my train of thought again. I am a Gemini, and I know that if you're under 35, that probably doesn't mean anything to you. But back when I was growing up, your astrological sign was actually something that people might pay attention to. And while I know for a fact that astrology probably doesn't mean anything, it is sometimes still accurate. I suppose a broken clock is accurate twice a day. But I have many what can be called stereotypical traits of a Gemini, not the least of which is the fact that I can lose my train of thought. I can lose my train of thought while holding onto it with both hands and staring right at it. And I really should, because I am aware that this is a problem, I really should go out of my way to try to avoid it. And unfortunately, I don't do that as well as I probably should. I'm really hoping that my guns do not decide to shoot me, since my mining ship has only enough armor block to hold it together. It doesn't have anything approaching what should be a sufficient amount of armor to survive any sort of attack. And something that has happened to me in my off-screen time at least once is dying because of the fact that my guns were shooting at a Terminator and I happened to get caught in the middle. So my guns do not discriminate. And for anyone that doesn't think so, I have to tell you, the machines versus man is a thing. I know, because my guns have killed me at least once. And I think that they were probably snickering while they did it. I don't hold it against them. They're just doing their job. I happen to get in the way. But still, it wasn't very funny to me. Now this ought to be a lot easier for driving. Now that I have improved my rover, taking it out is much more beneficial, since I've already found gold and silver deposits recently, and I'm going to be taking it out again soon. I am still missing the power generated by my wind turbines, as much as I have an almost infinite supply of ice at the moment. And now, thanks to capturing several enemy ships and shooting down hundreds of Terminators, I actually have a healthy supply of uranium as well. I don't like the idea of relying on non-renewable resources. So I am still trying to figure out how to do wind turbines in such a way that I don't have to worry about the guns shooting them down. I'm still working on that. Unfortunately, wind turbines do not work when attached to a subgrid. I have already tried in creative mode a couple of times, and you cannot attach wind turbines to either a piston or a rotor and get them to work. They read as wind clearance none, so they simply will not function. Which is really sad, because I had hoped to build a system whereby I could just go ahead and mount them on a piston and then have everything set up on a sensor, so that when the bad guys showed up, the sensor would just retract the piston, and then my wind turbines could disappear down into a bunker or behind a blast door or something of that nature. But sadly, that will not work. So I've got to figure out something else. Oop, I think I went down a little bit too far there. I am hoping that at some point the vanilla game includes something involving concrete or something similar to it, so that we can replace voxels without having to use either a mod or a non-survival feature of the game. One of the things that I have lobbied for and have suggested on both the Steam forum and the Keen Software House forum, or suggestion forum, whatever you would call it, is the ability to do something like that. And I had received confirmation several years ago that something like that was coming, but I imagine that it unfortunately went by the wayside. So now, and this is one of the tricks to doing this sort of work is the fact that you do have to be a little more precise with it, and you have to be patient. And I'm being a lot fussier about this than I really need to be. But one of the things about removing voxels, as I said, is because we can't put them back. This is unlike other facets of Space Engineers where if you build something and you don't like it, you go ahead and you take it apart and go ahead and build a new one. Unless you're dealing with power cells, you can go ahead and build something and then take it apart an infinite number of times, and it's not an issue. But when it comes to removing voxels, once they're gone, they're gone. One of the future projects that I am considering is a recreation of my earliest days of Space Engineers when I was starting in space, and I built a rather large asteroid base that I called Zebra 1-4, and I had actually gone so far, I spent hundreds of hours building the base in survival mode, and I actually went so far as to write up a backstory and to start to write a short story, a fictional piece about the owner of the asteroid and so on and so forth. Basically, back again in the early days of Space Engineers, when you started with the ugly yellow mining ship, it was very easy to imagine yourself as some sort of a prospector or some sort of an explorer traveling alone in space, and then you find an asteroid, or you find a wrecked ship of some kind, and then you begin to see what you can do with it. And as a sandbox game, you have to make your own goals, and you have to kind of make your own rules and make your own fun, set your own challenges and so forth. And so building the base, the backstory that I had set up was a basic pioneer, a basic explorer, had managed to cobble together enough of an investment to get himself a basic explorer ship, one of the ugly yellow, we used to call it the ugly yellow bus, explorer ships. He had cobbled enough money together to buy one, and he had gotten himself, I suppose that in the future when people go off into space to do prospecting and so forth, that they will have to have permits, because the government has to have their share of everything. But he had gotten himself a mining permit, and he had access to a particular hunk of space, or he had rights to a particular hunk of space. And so he went out and started doing his prospecting and doing his mining, found a large asteroid, and one of the reasons why I was so enamored of the project was the fact that I found an asteroid, and this is again back in the day when all of the asteroids were very similar. They did not procedurally generate back then, and so it was the same. You would have the same 9 or 12 or 15 asteroids that would repeat, and they might have different ores on them, but visually they look the same. And so you would get to the point where you would recognize, oh yeah, that's the one with the hole in it, or that's the one with the funky arm. Oh, there go the guns shooting right past me again. Making me a little bit nervous here. But the asteroid that I found when I started this new map was unique. I only ever saw it once. I never saw it on another map after probably 100 or more starts, and I could not recreate it in any way, shape, or form. Oh, helps when you hit the right button. Got to be careful when you don't lose track of where you're at. But I was unable to recreate this asteroid despite many attempts at it, and so I saved this map for the longest time, and it was a large asteroid, and it was absolutely beautiful for the purposes that I had. And I started out, it was a very organic process, I started out inside the asteroid. It was hollow on the inside. Most of the iron deposits were on the inside. So I started inside and built my base. And even though we didn't have freighter ships at the time, I basically did all of this as a role-playing sort of thing, imagining that there might be pirates or what have you. And so I started out inside the asteroid for safety's sake, and then when I began filling up the interior with all of my equipment, then I began moving outside, and then I began adding exterior structures to the base, and the whole thing grew very organically. Basically, as I needed a new part of the base, I would go ahead and I would add it, and it grew to be quite large and quite extensive. And I eventually got to the point where the entire backstory included the fact that even though it was a relatively important stopover point for refueling for ships passing through that sector, when it first started, it eventually got to the point where other better stations had been built nearby, and thus its importance had somewhat diminished. And so it had gone from being a relatively busy port to being a spot where people would occasionally stop by, and then of course it was still effective as a mining location. But I had gone so far as to build a museum where I kept my original ugly yellow bus mining ship that I had started the game with, as well as a few other key pieces of equipment that I had managed to cobble together in order to make my life a little easier. And I got to the point where with mods I had built myself an office and a residence for myself and so forth. I went so far as to record all of the times that my engineer died while I was building the base, and each time I did that, I basically recorded it, and then I would put up a sound block with a sensor on it. And I had thought about recording a voiceover. Unfortunately, I never got around to it, but I had thought about recording a voiceover that would explain on such and such a date, this person perished while attempting to make the base, and I would just give them different names, and I figured each of those was actually a tribute to one of the times that I had died making this base, mostly doing something stupid. One of the, at least one of the circumstances when I died was I had drilled a hole from the inside of the asteroid to the outside of the asteroid, and I got inside and started welding. And by this time, there actually were other ships in the game, and my outside of my base came under attack, and all of my power was inside the asteroid, and all of the guns were outside. So I was hurriedly trying to put in enough conveyors so that power would get to the guns, and I was climbing along inside the tunnel that I had dug by hand in order to put down the conveyors, and as I was dropping things in and welding things up, my engineer became stuck in the tube. I had no power. We didn't have oxygen bottles back then, and so the only way for me to get out would have been to sever the conveyor connection, which would have silenced the guns, which would have meant that my base probably would have been destroyed. So I lay there stuck in the tube as the pirates flew by and my guns engaged them, and I could just see some brave soul sacrificing himself so that the rest of the base would survive by not, I could see other people on the radio telling him to go ahead and cut his way out, and then they would figure out a different way to defend the base or whatever. And he said, "No, it's you guys need to survive. You go ahead, and I'll be fine." And I could see some plaque being put up in his honor as someone who sacrificed himself for the good of his co-workers or for the good of other people in the base. I wonder how I'm doing on the ice. Remember what I said about being distracted? Or easily distracted? Yep, the generators are still overflowing with ice, and the large cargo container still has almost 4 million kilograms of ice. So, not going to be running out of hydrogen anytime soon, which means my hydrogen engines are still going to be humming away. Very happy about that. My hydrogen tank is almost full. And I don't know why I ever bother, because you never get anything out of that when you do that way. Yeah, it's reading as full, except for the fact that last liter, which is probably, that's what we have as the constant draw and the constant feed. The hydrogen generators are constantly making hydrogen. It's constantly going into the tank, and it's constantly being drawn off into the hydrogen engines, and so that's why this is a little bit misleading. This is 99% full, and to look at this, you would think that it's 25% empty. So that's something that you need to think about when you're just taking a quick glance at the status of some of your bars on some of your batteries and some of your tanks and some of your things. Just because it's down by 1 bar does not mean that it's down 25%. That means that it's less than 100. And the difference between 75% and 99% is pretty substantial. I have driven miles in my car on that much fuel. So I apologize if this episode has been a little dull, but as I had put in the title, this is going to be housekeeping today. This is probably going to be the last of the housekeeping that I have to worry about. I've got a brand new driveway and everything looks nice, and I've managed to put lights on everything. I think my fighter is going to be done, although I have already come up with a better design for a fighter, so I will probably take that out in some brave and daring attack on something that I probably shouldn't be attacking, and then I'll start building another fighter. But that's how this game goes. I am going to do in off-screen play while I'm recovering from surgery. I am going to be exploring the far side of this mountain range here just to see what's on the other side of it. I'm going to go ahead and take a flyer and go over there, and I'm going to see if there are ice lakes and enemy bases and all kinds of other things. I will be making sure that I have a complete mod list at the end of this episode, or I'm sorry, in the comments section of this episode, since I have, as I had mentioned before, I've turned on quite a few mods that would generate enemies on planets or randomly generate enemy bases that are discovered, or wrecks or crashes that might be discovered. And I haven't explored far enough to have any of those generate yet. So I'm going to go looking around and see what's going on. I may take the Sikorsky out and see if there isn't anything that I can go out and explore and recover. And we'll go from there. The next big episode, the next big amount of work that I do, I'm going to start cutting back into the base. I have been working on a prototype of the flyer that I would like to build in creative mode, just to get an idea of how big it's going to be, so that I can get an idea of how long this is going to take. It's really big. It's really, really big. And it's going to take a really, really long time to build it. And, well, let's just say that if the main deck is located where my current floor is in my base, the top of the hill isn't high enough. So I may have to be doing some digging. I may wind up putting my top secret flying machine in the basement. But we'll go from there. Let me know what you think about my idea. Is it still crazy? Am I biting off more than I can chew? Or is this the kind of thing that you'd really like to see? You'd really like to see an attempt. You'd like to see me make a try at it. I appreciate the comments and the constructive criticism, suggestions, and so on and so forth. I appreciate the input. As always, likes are appreciated, and subscriptions doubly so. This is Dark Geyser signing off. Thank you for watching.